And basically, we have come to a level where when Bhante is explaining Yavakalapi Sutta, Yavakalapi Sutta is actually available in the Salayatana Samyutta, in the Samyutta Nikaya, that is the connected discourses of the Buddha, and which explains about 5 different kinds of possibilities how thought generation can happen. Using those thoughts, actually, we start proliferating or we start conceiving, and that actually adds as a kind of a heaviness, as a burden to the mind. So ultimately, we suffer. So typically, in certain suttas, actually, the proliferation is explained, like in Madhupindika Sutta, as we discussed already. And in the Savakalapi Sutta, apart from proliferation, prapancha, there are various other possibilities are explained, and how very subtle level of mental formations can happen, how subtle levels of thoughts can generate, and which can lead to proliferation, overthinking, ultimately craving and conceit, and all this also can happen. So there are 5 possibilities actually explained in this sutta. First one is called Manjana, a very subtle form of conceiving. Thinking that there is a person here, I am here. So I-based thinking, I-centered thinking, a person-based thinking. So that is what we typically do. And the whole education system and our upbringing all actually promotes this person, the personality view, the I-centered way of using our language. So using that, we start thinking, there I am this one, this is my photo, this is my car, this is my wife, this is my husband, this is my child, this is my school, this is my university. So likewise, so there are various ways that we can combine two different kinds of relationships. And ultimate result is that I-based thinking. So that is one thing. And another possibility of thought generation is called agitation, what we call as the injana. So which is actually prompted or promoted as a result of the craving. So aja is a name or synonym for craving, tanha. So when craving is in operation in our mind, so basically the different kinds of thoughts can arise. So this is my car. This is, I love this car. So I love my country. I love cricket. I love eating maybe sandwiches. So whatever it is, so we have our desires, we have our craving. So as a result of that, many different kinds of thoughts can arise. Assume that you have an affair with someone. So many different thoughts arise. So there, I is there. I-centered thinking is also there. But the main influence is coming from the craving. So that craving related, I-generated, I-related thinking, what we call as the agitation here, is sometimes called as injana. Yeah, mind is going through such kind of a, type of an agitation, because the craving is always in operation inside the mind. It doesn't allow the mind to take a rest. And today, actually, we can discuss about another side, what we call as Pandita. So we already discussed injana, and now we can get into the third possibility, how the mind can get into different kinds of thinking because of what we call as the pandana, or sometimes called as trembling or palpitation. So the basic idea is the mind is in kind of a continuous palpitation, a kind of a trembling. Mind can't rest. Mind can't simply stay quiet. Mind can't take a good rest. Rather, it often becomes restless. That's a nivarana. Sometimes we call it as a hindrance. That hindrance, the operation of the hindrance is basically is to make the mind completely restless. Assume that you are asking your little kid to stay quiet, asking your little kid to stay as it is, without wandering, without running away, just sit. He can't stay longer. He may stay about 5 minutes, 10 minutes. After that, he start changing his posture. He starts getting up. He starts moving around. Ultimately, he may vanish. He may go away. He may run away. Because it is impossible to sit quietly. It is impossible to keep the body quietly because the mind is restless. It is not that really the body is the main reason, but the mind does not have such a attitude to remain calm, remain quiet, remain still. Rather, mind is always in a restless situation. So becoming restless is one of the hindrance our minds are going through. So all different kinds of eye-making, mind-making, eye-centered thinking, and different kinds of relationships. I like this, I like that, so this is how I am. So like as different kinds of thinking can happen because of this very rooted quality or very rooted characteristics of the mind. So that is the restlessness. So mind is going through a kind of a trembling situation. Now there are certain verses in Dhammapada which explains this situation. Where Buddha explained, Pandanang chapalang chittang durakkang dunnivarayang ujum karoti medhavi ushukarova tejana. So this is in the Dhammapada where Buddha mentioned, so this mind is always like unsteady and is so fickle and so difficult to guard. It's always trembling and it is unsteady. So the wise person is actually trying to steady it. How he is doing it? Like a fletcher straightens an arrow. He is straightening an arrow shaft. Now, when you are taking from the natural forest, it is not the straight arrow, but you need to straighten it. You have to use various methods to straighten it. So then only we can say it's a very balanced, very straight arrow. So likewise, Buddha mentioned, the wise person is straightening the mind. So it doesn't allow the mind to, wiggle, or simply change, kind of sway to this side and that side. Rather, it likes to keep the mind very steady, kind of a straight, without getting into any kind of a trembling situation. So that is why one is developing mindfulness. That is why one is keeping the mind very steady. When the mind is stable, one-pointed, we can say, fairly collected, concentrated, fairly focused. So these are the areas actually we are talking, how we are trying to behave the mind, how we are trying to restrain the mind, and basically keeping the mind very straight, stable, still. So that is something that we need to do as a practice, as a training. Then we can say, okay, now mind is somewhat stable, somewhat steady. There is no trembling. And there are other suttas which is explaining this possibility. Now another sutta is actually Mahakappina Sutta, where Buddha mentioned, Ānāpānasati samadhissa bhikkhave bhavitatta bahuli katatta neva kāyassa injitattang va hoti panditattang va na chittassa injitattang va hoti panditattang. So basically he is explaining about the Ānāpānasati, mindfulness on breathing, and there Buddha highlights, so if one is able to practice Ānāpānasati, mindfulness of breathing, so that is one mechanism or one strategy to straighten the mind, to keep the mind without shaking, without trembling. Not only the mind, even the body. Because when the mind becomes untrembling, kind of not trembling, very steady, accordingly the body also becomes steady, very still. Because mind is quite still, accordingly the body also becomes still. So basically this is a kind of a skill that we need to develop. So Anapanasati, therefore Buddha recognized as a one methodology to do this. So as you are keeping your mind more and more with the in-breath, more and more with out-breath, so that breathing actually softens. Breathing becomes very quiet, very natural, and very quiet, very subtle. So mind also becomes subtle, very soft, fairly stable, and that shifting becomes less and less. It can shift, but it can return quickly. So likewise, you understand, as we practice Anapanasati, mindfulness on breathing, so slowly, so mind becomes very, very stable, and you can keep your mind steadily for one place or one object for a long time. So that is why we call it as concentration, we call it as one-pointedness, stability of the mind. So that is actually a result or benefit of Anapanasati meditation. Not only Anapanasati, if you are practicing, say, rising and falling. So you are keeping your attention on rising and falling. So there also you understand, okay, you can keep your attention at the tummy, at the abdomen, and it will remain there for a long time. At the beginning, it is difficult. It may wander. It may get distracted. But you can again and again bring it back. But as you continue your practice, you will understand, okay, now the mind has become really steady. No more wavering, no more shifting, no more what we call as trembling, shaking. Rather, now the mind is quite steady, remain calm, and keeping its attention maybe in rising and falling. So likewise, when we are introducing a very subtle, natural process to the mind, so the mind also can become very steady, very stable, living in the present moment. So that is a benefit of this meditation actually. So one benefit of meditation is that stabilizing the mind, collecting the mind, minimizing the restlessness, and again keeping attention where we want. So we introduce a new object, a kind of a selected object, and that becomes the mind's posture. That becomes where the mind is located, where the mind is fairly pointed out. So that ultimately resulting to stabilize the mind, to minimize this wandering path, minimize this shaky, trembling situation. But the interesting thing is, if this trembling happens again, if the shaking happens, it promotes thinking. It loses that balance, it loses that stability, it promotes thinking. It becomes restless, it may go to a sound, maybe go to a form, or maybe smell, taste, some kind of a tactile sensation, or maybe to a thought. So many distractions can happen. So those distractions, once the mind drifted, promotes thinking. On the other hand, this is another very deep subject where Buddha mentioned, Nissitasa chalitang, anisitasa chalitang nati. Now, when your mind is associating something, when it is dependent on something, you are ultimately subjected to some kind of a wavering, because you are not independent. Because we are dependent on something, we are based on something, but that where we are based on is a quite unstable something. Now, say for example, you are traveling by a bus, and assume that the road is not that good. You are trying to fall maybe a kind of a fall or something stable, but when the bus is going through some difficult road situation, the bus also become quite unstable, shaking, trembling. You also become unstable and trembling, because what you are holding is also unstable. So everything what we hold, everything what we cling are unstable, because they are subjected to impermanence, they are going through unsatisfactoriness, they are beyond our control. As a result of that, what happens is that we ultimately become trembling. We ultimately become restless. We ultimately become shaky because what we are holding is also subject to some kind of a shaky trembling. So that is also not stable. Since we are holding something unstable, we also become unstable. So the point here mentioned is Nissarana Chalita. So that means whenever the mind is associating something, it becomes subject to some kind of a trembling, some kind of a wavering. But if we are able to associate nothing, basically, that means we are not trying to associate anything shaky, anything vulnerable, anything which is subjected to some kind of a trembling. So all the conditioned phenomena are subjected to trembling. There is no exception. So all the conditioned phenomena. So whatever the conditioned phenomena inherently have that quality, that is the shakiness, changing nature, arising and passing away nature, kind of disappearing nature. So all that very changing nature is one intrinsic characteristic of this conditioned phenomena. So in case if we are associating that, so we also become quite unstable. So therefore, if we are able to keep the mind without associating any of those, now we are not putting onto anything. Now we are holding onto anything. Now we are not grasping anything. And we are not keeping our stand on anything. Rather, the mind become without any kind of an association. Completely, we can say, liberated. There is no object. And there is freedom. Instead of any association, everything is abandoned, let go of. So the mind becomes kind of free. Anisitasa chalitana. Since it does not associate anything, and there is nothing it can tremble. Because it doesn't have any footing. So if we are holding ourselves, if we are holding something which is quite vulnerable, which is quite unstable, so we also ultimately get into a kind of a trembling, unstable situation. But currently we are not holding anything, not associating anything. So as a result of that, mind becomes stable. Anisitassa chalitannati. So if you are able to keep the mind independent, that means there is no wavering. Chalite asati pasadi. So Buddha mentioned, if there is no wavering, if there is no trembling, that means mind become very quiet, tranquil. And pasadya sati nati nahoti. So when you feel comfortable, when you feel satisfied, and there is no wavering. So another interesting result of this is there is no any inclination in the mind. There is no any bias in the mind. Because at the moment we are in a very balanced state, there is no any inclination in the mind. You are not biased to anything. So once you become biased, again you tremble. Rather, now you are very much like unbiased, very stable, very simple, clarity of the mind is available. So it's a kind of a stable, balanced mind, equanimous mind. And when that is there, Natiya asati agati gati nahoti. So when there is no inclination, when there is no craving, when there is no any kind of such attached bias in the mind. So another point is that there is no movement, there is no coming and going. So when you have an inclination, so you are ready to go to something else. Suppose that you are hearing some music, but it is something getting bored. And now mind inclines towards maybe to look at YouTube. Now you give up the song, now you watch the YouTube. Assume that now you are watching it, it becomes somewhat boring. Now you want to taste some food. Now the mind inclines towards the tasty of maybe a chocolate, say for example. And now you give up the YouTube, now you go and approach maybe a chocolate bar. Now you are eating chocolate. Now suppose while you are eating that, you become a little bored. Now you want to call someone. Now the talking to someone becomes where the mind's inclination, again you go and do that. So coming and going, you are starting one job, starting another job, you are finishing it or stopping it in the middle, again going to a job, again starting another job. So always coming and going is there. Kind of wavering is there. Activities are there. But when there is no inclination, when there is no any kind of a grasping, when there is no any kind of a craving, so you become very stable, and coming and going is no more there. So you are still. You don't want to go to anything. You don't want to shift to anything. Rather, you become still. So that's the result of it. So basically, Natiya asati agati gati nahoti. So Buddha mentioned when there is no any inclination, so that means coming and going is not there. And further Buddha mentioned agati gatiya asati chutupapato nahoti. So when there is no coming and going, there is no passing away and reappearing. So that means there is no rebirth. That means when our mind is inclined towards something, we are eagerly waiting for that. We are eagerly hoping that. We wish that. Now we become that. We are born to that. We are born to a mental state, a mind-made state, which we thought beautiful, which we thought successful, which we thought happy than where we were. Now we are born to a new state. But where we are currently is also become unstable. Now we are wishing another state. So it's a never-ending process. But if we are not inclined to anything, there is no any inclination, so mind remains still, quiet, stable, then there is no coming and going, there is no wavering. And as a result of that, you are not going to reborn into a new state. You are in the present state. In the present moment, you are quite satisfied. In the present moment, you are 100% very much like perfected life. And Chutupavate asati, neva idana hurang na ubhe mantarena. So there Buddha highlights, so when such thing is possible, you don't feel I, you don't feel ego, you don't feel a person. There is no object, there is no inclination, there is no any kind of craving. Currently you are very much like ceased, completely cool, very calm, relaxed, stable, still. As a result of that, Buddha mentioned, you are not experiencing any ego. You are not experiencing any I, the person, individual. A kind of a very cool experience is there, that's it. Esevanto dukkha. So this is the end of suffering. This is also a very interesting area Buddha points out. So when we start associating something, if that what we are associating is unstable, so we also become unstable. Actually, what we are going to associate is always something unstable, very vulnerable, completely inconstant, always going through different arising and passing away oppression. And you can't have control over it. So when you are associating something where you can't have control, and when it is changing, and you are ultimately suffer. So in this Yavakalapi Sutta, so when pandita happens, that means when trembling happens, it generates a lot of thinking. It can lead to mental proliferation, overthinking. So as we discussed last time, so the Savakalapi Sutta has 5 possibilities explain how the thought generation can happen, how overthinking can happen. And one such possibility is this pandita, when one becomes trembled, when the mind becomes kind of unstable, when the mind becomes changed, kind of palpitation. So when such is there, the mind again become restless, again start thinking, and now it can connect to craving also. Now it can connect to I-centered thinking also. So all the other possibilities also can come into the picture. And now it's become a huge overthinking process. Likewise, you can understand. So the Savakalapi Sutta is very interesting one. And we want to spend some time here discussing these 5 points, because here we are trying to understand how this shakiness of the mind happen, how the instability of the mind happen, how the trembling of the mind happen, and what are their repercussions. And if we know that properly, so Buddha mentioned, so for us to keep the mind without restlessness, keep the mind very quiet, keep the mind very still, keep the mind stable. So that is one result of the practice. So as we just discussed, so when you are practicing Anapanasati, so during that period, your mind is quite stable. It does not waver. It does not tremble. Rather, it becomes tranquil, very calm, very relaxed. There is no tension. There is no agitation. Say you are practicing walking meditation. So the body is moving, but mind remains with all that selected objects without shifting to outside, without getting distracted. Basically, mind remains with you. And assume that you are practicing further, and you can see how different phenomena are arising and passing away, and that loses your grip, and you may even abandon all that object. If you are able to maintain the mind, what we just discussed in this Channovada Sutta, if you are able to maintain a mind which is not associating anything at all, so then there's a very interesting opportunity to keep the mind liberated or keep the mind quite freed. That freed mind is stable. That freed mind is free from craving, free from any agitation. So it is quiet, it is cool, it is very quiet, very silent, and there is no any kind of shakiness. There is no any bias. There is no any coming and going. As a result of that, you are not reborn to new state. Rather, in the present moment, you are quite happy. In the present moment, you are quite stable. In the present moment, you are very much like 100% satisfied. As a result of that, Buddha say, no suffering. No person, no suffering. This is something that we can look forward in our Vipassana practice. And if you are already able to recognize this state, where you are reaching a mental state where there is no changing in the mind, quite stable, very steady, and no wavering, and mind remains stable and calm and quiet, no inner chatter, no tension, and you feel like you stopped. You are in a long journey, you are quite tired, very heavy to the mind, kind of a burden, but all that burden has kept down, kept aside. All the tension has gone. You have become cool. You have become calm, very relaxed. You feel lightness. And you feel that your mind has stopped. So during that time, there is no suffering. So this is the state that actually we have to promote. How are we going to have such a tranquil, stable stillness in our mind? So that stillness is something, a product of Vipassana practice. And with that, I'd like to conclude today's Dhamma sermon. Now I'd like to open the session for questions.
Bhante. Today we have 4 questions.
Right.
First question is a general question. Dear Bhante, during last Q&A, there was a question about the natural tendency of the mind to get to negatively and downside, but Bhante highlighted that we can play the glad game and find happiness within the negativity. I recall Bhante also mentioned that according to scriptures, the mind is Prabhaswara or gold, but outside there is rust. However, we all feel and experience this negativity and gravitation towards dark side in us. Is it because of the conditional world and everything in it belongs to Mara? Metta, that is the end of the question.
Yeah, I think I can agree with you. So basically, till we are under the grip of the Mara, so there is what we call this worrying and sorrowing, and those kind of tendencies are there in the mind. But the interesting thing is we can train the mind as much as possible to minimize that sorrowful, regretting nature of the mind. Again and again it can come up, but we need to notice it. Again we need to give it up, let it go, and again keep the mind stable. Again may regrets happen, but we recognize it, give it up, again keep the mind stable. So it's a kind of a training. So we are reprogramming the mind, restructuring the mind. So that is what we have to do. So first of all, actually we need to recognize a stability of the mind. So that's one result of the vipassana, where we again and again highlight anisitoja vihirate nachakinchit loke upadi. So you are as a result of the vipassana practice, as a result of the satipatthana practice, so your mind can become associated to nothing. Basically, your mind does not associate anything, and you are not grasping anything in the world. So as a result of that, mind becomes stable. So that stability, that stillness is a product of our practice, and that we need to recognize. And once we are able to recognize that, so rather than allowing the mind to regret, again we sort of habituate the mind to come and associate this stillness. So that's why Buddha promotes it in the Indriya Bhavana Sutta. So whenever different kinds of sense activity is going on, there is a possibility that mind get drifted. There's a possibility mind get agitated. There's a possibility that mind become somewhat unstable. And Buddha say, okay, don't stay there. Come back and return in the middle state. Return in the least frictional state. Return in the kind of a quiet, balanced, equanimous state. Because that equanimous state is sublime. Etam santang, etam panitang, yadidang upekka. So this equanimous state is a very simple and quiet, relaxed, calm, tranquil state. So again and again, so Buddha highlights to return to that state. And that state we need to actually first understand through our practice as a product of the vipassana practice, and then we need to maximize it. Then we have to dwell in that state for longer and longer. Yeah, back to you.
Yeah. Second question out of 4, that is related to Dhammasamad. And dear Bhante, how can we practically use the understanding of prapancha in our practice? After sitting and walking practice during day to day, I tend to look at my mind whenever possible. When I do it without much outside interactions, I observe the thoughts coming, lingering and going away as a third-party observer. With some understanding from the book reading, now I can look at the workings and manifoldness of the thought process. Is this what is expected in practice? Appreciate Bhante's explanation. With metta, that is the end of the question.
Yeah, I can agree with you. Basically, we should understand the repercussions of the proliferation, the consequences of the proliferation. And one essential part of the practice should be to minimize this conceptual proliferation. So when we are practicing satipatthana, when we are practicing vipassana, if we still didn't pay enough attention to minimize conceptual proliferation, so that means still we haven't understood yet the vipassana. We still didn't appreciate this minimizing of conceptual proliferation. So that's why the theme of this practice in this session is to understand how maybe harmful it is or how useless it is, and maybe promoting a lot of desires and promoting a lot of defilements in the mind. So that conceptual proliferation is causing a lot of suffering. So we are understanding those repercussions, we are understanding those consequences, disadvantages of conceptual proliferation. So Buddha's advice is therefore to minimize it, to reduce it, and ultimately to abandon it. So the Buddha is the perfected one. Arahant is the perfected one who is completely free from conceptual proliferation. So the path has a significant influence coming from minimizing this conceptual proliferation. So we need to promote that, and we as practitioners always have to minimize conceptual proliferation, overthinking, and that helps even from the beginning of our Satipatthana practice, where we are recognizing an object and trying to keep our attention there, purposely, deliberately establishing mindfulness. And it leads to further stabilizing the mind by developing concentration, samadhi, that further reduces conceptual proliferation. Ultimately, the vipassana practice helps us through the wisdom also to understand the futile nature of all the conditioned phenomena. So ultimately, mind loses its grip to those conditioned phenomena and gives up everything and become further stable, further still. So that's why actually we are trying to promote it. Back to you. Yeah.
Now the third question out of 4. This is regarding the mindful walking. Dear Bhante, why do I, within bracket, or someone like us not having regular practice, close bracket, why do I like walking practice more than the sitting? Last 6 months, I hardly sat for meditation on my breath, but very happily did walking many times a week. With metta, that is the end of the question.
So that's a kind of a tendency you have, but I can really appreciate this tendency, because sometimes people are there who don't like to walk, but they only want to sit. So they are more into the samatha practice, they are more into the concentration practice. So it can have a lot of disadvantages. But if you prefer more into walking, that means you are somewhat biased towards vipassana. That is not a big disadvantage. Once your mind becomes somewhat stable and say the clarity of the mind is available and you are able to overcome various distractions during walking, so that means you start, so the mind recognize that calmness, mind recognize that comfort zone, and then it can even invite you to go and sit, because you understand that it's okay, I can be quiet down, calm down, relax, minimize chattering, inner chattering. How about maybe even keeping the body stable without moving? That means you want to sit now, or at least you want to stand at the end of the walking path without moving, because your mind requests, it wants to further stabilize, it wants to further become still. Walking is quite very gross, and it disturbs the mind. And there the mind requests you, okay, please sit, just stand, don't walk. That request may slowly come to you. So till that, keep walking. I mean, there is no harm in practicing more walking meditation, and it will slowly take you to another level. Yeah.
This is the last question, Bhante. This is related to mindful walking again. Dear Bhante, are there sutras detailing the walking practice we do? Thanks for your valuable service. With metta, that's the end of the question.
Actually, the technique from the beginning to end, it is not explained as such, but there is a sutta which explains the benefit of walking meditation, and that is called what we call Chankamananisansa Sutta, or we sometimes call it Chankama Sutta. That is in the Anguttara Nikaya Panchaka Nipata, the numerical discourses of the Buddha, where he explains the 5 factors. So there are 5 benefits Buddha mentioned, Chankamananisansa Sutta. It's in the Majjhima, in the Anguttara Nikaya 5 sections. Let me find it for you. Let me see if I can quickly find it out. Chankama Sutta. That is, actually there's another sutta called Chankama Sutta, where some group of monks are doing some walking meditation as a group. Some monks are walking with the Venerable Sariputta, someone is walking with Venerable Maha Moggallana, someone is walking with Maha Kassapa, someone is walking with Venerable Anuruddha, and some are walking with Venerable Punna Mantani Putta. So likewise, Buddha recognized that how certain monks actually incline towards various different arahants, and accordingly they do the walking meditation. There is one sutta called Chankama Sutta. So I'll put the link to that sutta also to the chat. But anyway, this is in Sinhala language. So how to put the chat? The chat is disabled. Here it is. Okay. So one is this Chankama Sutta. The other one is Chankama Nanisansa Sutta, where the Buddha explains about the 5 benefits of walking meditation. So that is in the Anguttara Nikaya. I'll put that also as a link. So you can use these links and find out some more detail. The first one is actually talking of something different, Chankama Sutta. But anyway, it explains that they are doing that even during the Buddha's time. So walking practice is one very important practice they have conducted. Anyway, in various suttas, Buddha mentioned, say in Satipatthana Sutta, Gacchantova Gacchantom Hiti Pajana. Gachamiti Pajana. So when we are walking, say you should know that you are walking. You can't allow the mind to get distracted while body is walking. So the walking body has to be well synchronized with the mind. So your attention, your awareness has to be with the walking posture. So different postures are available. So when the body is in walking posture, the attention has to be with that. And there are other suttas where Buddha mentioned, okay, the monks have to cleanse the mind, purify the mind, either with walking or sitting during the daytime. During the evening, also using walking and sitting, you need to cleanse the mind, purify the mind. At night, you need to do the walking and sitting, and you need to do the cleansing of the mind. Chankamanena nisinnena avaraniyehi dhammehi chittam parisodehi. So Buddha mentioned there are hindrances which are covering the mind. And now you need to practice walking meditation, you need to practice sitting meditation so that you are able to cleanse your mind, purify your mind from those hindrances. So likewise, Buddha advised a monk in certain other suttas. Back to you. Your mic is muted.
That was the last question, Bhante. We have about 20 minutes now. Is it okay to open session to the audience?
Maybe for 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, another 5 minutes we can spend.
Yeah. If you have any questions, can you please raise your hand? Then I will be able to unmute. Seems to be no one is asking questions, Bhante.
Right.
Yeah. So we come to the end of the program. And first, I would like to thank Bhante for his valuable time. Also, we like to pass our merits to everyone, both seen and unseen, who are enabling this program. And we pass our merits to all participants for joining the program. With that, I would like to conclude the program today. Thero Sarana.
Yeah, Thero Sarana.